an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Parable of the Talents, chapters 19, 20, 21, and epilogue. In these chapters, we get to see just how Larkin, aka Asha, grows up. You know, she wound up being taken care of, and I guess that's what's important. But it will never, ever be okay. I hated it. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Danique for commissioning this episode. Danique, I am really interested to hear your thoughts on this ending, because so when I was thinking about it last night before I started the reading, I was asking myself, what would my ideal ending for this book be? And I really couldn't come up with an answer to that question, mostly because the books are so unflinching when it comes to dealing with the reality of like the way the world works, the way that people work, the way that nobody from the outside will really care about what you've built the way that you will. And thus, anything that I thought of for an ending, I was just kind of like, that just seems absurd and naive and ridiculous. And I just couldn't really imagine, even outside of my pie in the sky hopeful endings, what would be a satisfying way for this story to wrap. I couldn't think of any sort of ending that would actually feel satisfying to me in the end. And I'm pleased to say that I'm actually pretty satisfied with this ending, more than I expected, more than I was worried, to be perfectly honest. I was worried that I would reach the end of this book, and after going through the absolute horror that is the slavery and the loss, that I would be feeling like, oh my God, Danique, why did you do this to me? I was very worried that that was going to be my feelings on it. And I don't feel that way. And that's honestly all I can kind of ask for. That's a win for me. But the ending of this book might be one of the most painful, heartbreaking endings of anything that I have ever read. And it is one of those bitter pills that you just kind of have to swallow, the way that you kind of have to swallow people in life never necessarily getting their comeuppance or what they deserve. The way that you just sort of have to accept that people who did you wrong may never admit that they did you wrong. They may never even genuinely believe that they did you wrong. As much as you can point to a number of what you think are objective instances of hurtful, damaging, harmful behavior, they may not see it that way. And all you can do is decide how you're going to handle the fact that they did this to you. But it is not within your power to determine whether or not they are willing to hear you out or accept your judgment on what they did. And, you know, there's moments where I was like, all right, so I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's back up. Starting with chapter 19. All religions are ultimately cargo cults. And this is from the perspective of Larkin, aka Asha. Adherents perform required rituals, follow specific rules, and expect to be supernaturally gifted with desired rewards. Long life, honor, wisdom, children, good health, wealth, victory over opponents, immortality after death, any desired rewards. Earthseed offers its own rewards, room for small groups of people to begin new lives and new ways of life with new opportunities, new wealth, new concepts of wealth, new challenges to grow and to learn and to decide what to become. Earthseed is the dawning adulthood of the human species. It offers the only true immortality. It enables the seeds of the earth to become the seeds of new life, new communities on new earths. The destiny of Earthseed is to take root among the stars and there again to grow, to learn, and to fly. So it's interesting that this is written by Larkin because there's a sound to this as if she actually believes this, which, I mean, I certainly wasn't expecting. She has seemed rather anti-Earthseed this entire time. And we come to find out that it's really that she is anti her mother. And, guys, this is hard. This is really hard. So we find out that she says something about how she began creating secret dream mask scenarios when she was 12. And this winds up pointing to the overall direction of her life. She is a creative person. And from reading what I have about Octavia Butler, part of me wonders how much of this is based on her life. I am sure that there is some, either interviews with her where she talks about what this story means to her, or there have been other pieces written by people who know her life better who draw comparisons. But I think that she wrote her first story when she was around 12 years old, and it was a sci-fi story. So this kind of is just ringing that bell for me. So she winds up getting in huge amounts of trouble because even though dream masks are allowed, only certain stories are actually sanctioned. It's not like you can just go around doing whatever you feel like doing, especially considering one of the dream masks that she found when she was younger and has hidden away is a pornographic one. It was labeled the story of Moses, but it wound up being this really filthy porno. And so what they are worried about, I think, is her being part of creating things like that and putting them out into the world. Her friends who were helping with the dream masks also got into huge amounts of trouble. And she was able to recognize, even at that time, how unjust it was that dream masks were considered a totally acceptable form of entertainment, but that if it was written by her, it was different. It was just not treated as acceptable. It was not treated as clean and pure and righteous. And she says, it was as though my teachers believed that all the possible stories had already been created, and it was a sin to make more. Or at least it was a sin for me to make more. I really would love to talk to her about where this comes from for her, because I am sure that as a Black woman writing sci-fi, which has been, science fiction was created by women, but men, as usual, took hold of it, and white men especially took hold of it and decided that it was theirs, the way that white men do. I can't help but think that she probably got this kind of reaction from her stories. That, they were just like, what are you doing here? You don't belong here. You don't get to do this. And that part of the reaction in this moment is informed by her actual conversations that she probably had or criticisms that she received. So she wrote the scenarios, and she wrote them into a notebook. And, when she says notebook, this is she says she's using a stylus. So this is obviously something that's like an iPad kind of thing. And she said, I could code them to erase the scenarios if someone else tried to get into them. or thought I could. And eventually somebody like looks into her notebook, and they do manage to get into it and open it up and read exactly what she has written. And she had to attend special religious classes for delinquents, get counseling. And then eventually the kids began to spread rumors about her. It was sort of like the way that it can be amongst adults, where if other people are afraid enough that they are going to be accused of whatever crime is like the most fashionable to be concerned about of the day, whether that be being a heathen in this case, or being communist, or what have you. This group of kids all decided that since she had been like taken in for counseling and been forced to do all of this like extra work, that they wanted to distance themselves from her as much as possible. At least that's the impression that I get. So they begin to talk about how her parents aren't her real parents, which she doesn't know. And they don't know either. They are simply saying that because there are enough adopted kids out there that it's certainly possible. And it's a nice, cruel thing to say that you don't belong to your own family. The funny thing is, with Larkin, she gets along so badly with her adopted parents that she has already been imagining that maybe she is adopted. And it never, these kids put this seed in her mind that while they are doing it to be cruel, it begins to grow. The kids started on her, and then eventually the adults. Think about what kind of woman her real mother must be. That's got to leave a mark on her. You wait, that girl is no good. My grandmother used to say the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. Or, well, what can you expect? Ver means truth, doesn't it? And the truth is there's bad blood in her if there was ever bad blood. I remember turning around in church to confront the nasty old woman who had stage whispered this last bit of stupidity to her equally ancient friend. And she looks at her and says, God is love. Love is fulfilling of the law. And Casey, her adopted mother, gets really angry and takes her home and yells at her about her, the fact that she doesn't appreciate what they've done for her, and that she's ungrateful for everything that she has. And eventually somebody at school pushes her too far, tells her that her mother was not just a heathen, but a whore and a murderer. And she breaks the girl's jaw because she does not realize her own strength. She has never been tested. She has never gotten into this kind of altercation before. She doesn't know her own strength. And she breaks the girl's jaw. And this is a really big deal. Like, almost... This almost resulted in her being put into a collar. The only person who manages to keep her out of it was Madison, her adopted father, who, she is surprised, fights for her. It becomes very clear why. He basically gropes her and tells her that she should show some gratitude, that he saved her from something brutal. And maybe he won't be able to save her next time. You know, your mama wanted to let you go on and be collared. She thinks you hurt that girl on purpose. You need to be nice to me, Asha. I'm all you've got. So, I hate this guy. She winds up, providing for them later on in life, and I just hate it so much. She says, they did their duty by me, I'll do my duty by them. And I'm like, I guess... This is one of those things that, considering the way this is talked about, it doesn't feel to me like she is under any illusions that this was okay. And it startles me a little bit that she feels obligation to them. But it doesn't exactly surprise me, because that is one of the products of abuse, is if people tell you things like you're ungrateful often enough, you begin to think that maybe you are. And you start to like, I have seen this firsthand. You really begin to feel guilty for just demanding to be treated like a fucking human being. So, this is just, it's really hard to read. It really is. So she manages to just do things to keep out of Madison's way. And that winds up being the motivation for a lot of what she does later in life, is just trying to stay away from him and eventually leaving home early because he is getting super aggressive and way more overt about it. And it gets to a point where her adopted mother notices and, of course, blames her and gets angry at her rather than looking at the fact that her husband is a disgusting pedophile. You know, no, we can't talk about that, but I will definitely blame you, a child, for what my husband is doing. This is just a tale as old as time, kids being blamed for the things that adults do to them. And it is one of those things that when you talk about it, people speak about these kinds of reactions as if they're like legends. Like, yeah, you know, some people blame the kids for it. They act as if this isn't so incredibly common that it's almost the norm. And that's because we all like to think that if a kid came to us and told us that somebody was doing something to them, that we and everybody would have the appropriate reaction and would protect the child the way that we know we are supposed to protect children. But we don't want to think about how many times we have failed kids and people like us have failed kids. We just don't like to know that that's the kind of world we live in. So we pretend that these reactions are rare rather than like more common than any other. It's, we go back to, Olamina, and she is back in Georgetown after everything that went down with killing those two guys who tried to mug her. And she is kind of not really sure what to do with herself at this point. She's just trying to get by, and she's trying to formulate strategies for looking for her daughter. But it's sort of growing more and more clear that like a lot of time has passed and people are starting to think that she might be wasting her time. And eventually Allie says to her, "You may never find her, and she may already be dead." And of course, it's understandable. Olamina does not want to hear this, but she's also not a fool. And she knows that there's a good chance Allie is right about this. And, you know, as we know, this sort of, she dedicated everything, all of her time, to trying to find Larkin. That was like her goal, as much as Earthseed was. But Larkin, when she finally meets her, thinks, well, Marcus found me. I guess you just didn't try to find me that hard. I hate Marcus so much. I hate him more than maybe any character in any book I've ever read. Because Marcus believes himself to be doing God's work. Marcus has truly fooled himself, even though he knows really in his heart, but he refuses to look at that truth, that he is involved with an organization that is corrupt, that has done great harm. And not only has he chosen to align himself with them because his ego demanded it, but he turns his back on his only family who saved him, who offered him a home, because they would not satisfy his ego. That was the reason he left, was he wanted to be able to preach the way that he wanted to preach. And I don't even really believe that the religion itself meant that much to him. I believe that it was all about his ego. And he not only turned his back on Olamina and didn't tell her where he was going. She found out because she asked the right person who told her, but he didn't intend for her to find him. Not only does he do that, but he apparently knew, like, I think he went up there because that was where Asha, as I'm going to call her now, was housed. And I think that he had found out really quickly where Olamina's daughter was and went and tracked her down as best he could, and then chose to keep it a secret because he wanted family that he could control and that fed into his ego the way that he needed. And what person would feed into your ego better than a child who has not been loved, a child who has had no family, a child who has been abused and homeless? What child could possibly make him feel bigger and more like a savior and a great man than a child like that? And he never told his sister, and he told this little girl that her parents were dead, and got her so much on his side that even when she found out that her mother was still alive, she didn't feel betrayed by him. She didn't feel that there was something highly suspect about the fact that he hadn't told her the truth, and that did not make her wonder what kind of man he was. Instead, it made her wonder how hard her mother could actually have tried to find her, that maybe her mother didn't actually love her, when her mother risked everything over and over and over again, over and over and over again. And not only is it like frustrating because Olamina did not have the resources at her disposal. She was not a member of Christian America. She couldn't have found the records on where Larkin had been sent. And, but not only that, but like Asha has to know that. Olamina and her history of being like on the streets, and the fact that she did not have resources is not a secret. But Larkin is so determined to see her mother as an enemy, as somebody who is not to be trusted, that despite all the evidence pointing to the fact that Marcus is not the one to trust, she does pretty much what Marcus did and decides that she would rather believe a lie because it's what she needs, regardless of, you know, whether it's the truth, whether it's hurtful to someone else. And she doesn't ask the questions that she should, like about what exactly his connection is to the people that took down Acorn. And I had said before that I was very worried since all of these crusaders showed up after Marcus left. There was a big part of me that was extremely worried Marcus had either purposefully or inadvertently put them on the trail to Acorn. I don't think that anymore. But the fact is that he gets confronted again by Olamina a little bit later, and he still won't hear what she is telling him. And it's one of the most deeply frustrating storylines I've ever read, where the evidence is in front of him, and he will even admit that these people did what they did and are calling themselves Christian Americans, but he will not admit to the fact that these people were part of the same organization. He continually distances himself and pretends that they aren't the same thing, that they are different people, even though she tells him that she saw one of the same guards at the very same building that he was preaching at. So it's just, he is so belligerent and he is just so prideful and so cruel in his pride, because he is willing to sacrifice other people in order to feed it. That it is one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever read. I don't think I've ever come across this sort of villain before, who, like, you know, the villain that we tend to bring up when we're all talking about villains we hate the most often is Dolores Umbridge. Harry Potter's extremely popular, and she really was one of the best written villains ever. And the thing about Dolores Umbridge is that she knows she's full of shit, and she's doing it anyway, and she's viciously lying, and she enjoys the pain of other people. But as much as I hate her, I can easily say that she knows what she's doing. Will she ever admit it to anybody? No. You know, like, will she ever actually feel regret beyond the fact that she didn't get away with something? No. But Marcus being so unwilling and to face the truth and in such denial, that is some shit that I cannot tolerate. I have no patience for people who are dishonest with themselves. And that is unfortunately how the majority of us are. So this is why I hardly have any friends. Let's be perfectly honest about that. Most of us are dishonest with ourselves to one degree or another. But are you working on that? Are you trying to be better? Are you trying to, like, push past these lies you've told yourself and get to the truth of the matter? Because if so, that's enough for me. I just want to know that you're trying to do better. And this is how I feel about, like, basically hurting others as well. Even if you hurt other people, we aren't, any of us, going to get through life without hurting somebody. Whether or not we mean to, it's going to happen. Do you face up to the fact that you hurt someone and try to look at your behavior and what you did and not do it again? That's the question. You can't be perfect. You can't. But can you hold yourself to a higher standard next time? Can you be as brutally honest with yourself as you need to be to acknowledge that maybe you did something out of selfishness? Maybe you did something hurtful out of cowardice, and keep an eye on that behavior in yourself and admit to yourself that you have the potential to be these ugly things that you don't want to admit, and try to do better. And that's all that we can do. But Marcus is unwilling to admit when he has hurt the way that he needs to. And for some reason, he turns Olamina into a villain. And it's baffling to me. She bought and saved him and gave him someplace to go, and he behaves as if she did some grievous injury to him. And I honestly don't know what it is that he thinks that she did, other than, I guess, not allow him to preach the way that he wanted to. It's like all she did to try and save him means nothing to him anymore. And the fact that she tried to take him into her home and give him a place in the world means nothing to him anymore. Does the fact that she was the one to save him, is that the very thing that causes him to pull away from her? Is that the very thing that makes him angry at her, that she saved him? That's all I can think, because otherwise I really do not understand him. And I appreciate the way that the dialogue is written between the two of them, because Olamina speaks to him the way that I also would. There's nothing more difficult than reading characters who have dialogue that doesn't get at the heart of what you think they should be immediately talking about, because you think this will be the way past the misunderstanding. And she talks to him about exactly what I would were I her. The thing is, it doesn't matter, because there's nothing that she can say to him that's going to get through. And that really, like, I feel like a lesser writer might not have written the dialogue that way, and so left me thinking that maybe Olamina had just not chosen the right words to get through to him. But instead, I am shown very starkly that using logic on this guy doesn't work. That's not what this is about. So I'm getting way ahead of myself, but I wanted to talk about that out of the gate, because this whole chapter is about Olamina and Belle, who partner up in order to travel. All of it in order to go up to Oregon so that Olamina can figure out where her daughter is. That's the main objective. And Belle, it turns out, is also a sharer. And she's acting really weird, and that's like how Olamina is sort of able to tell. And Belle doesn't realize that there are as many sharers as there are. So when Olamina is able to figure it out, Belle freaks out and runs off, because she feels like anybody knowing this about her is hugely dangerous, and she is uncomfortable with this information being out there. But Olamina, who can travel by herself and was only going to travel with Belle because Allie suggested it, just continues packing and preparing to leave as normal, resigning herself to maybe Belle won't team up with me after all, and that's okay. I don't really need her. If she wants to come, that's fine. And Belle comes back to her, and we find out that Belle basically was given up by her parents because she was kidnapped and held for ransom. She comes from a pretty wealthy family, and her parents did not pay the ransom. They just let her be. And eventually she manages to like get away. But there's this like sort of, you know, the rejection we find out is based on her parents' own guilt and the fact that they caused her to be a sharer because they were abusing drugs. And she was essentially a constant reminder of their own misbehavior and selfishness and the damage that they inflicted on her. So she was their least favorite, and her brother was the most favorite. And we also get some interesting information about these virtual reality rooms, which are pretty common among people who have money and are apparently like addicting. You can create any sort of world that you want for yourself. You can meet any people that you want. You can go to any places. And her mother basically never comes out of hers, is completely hooked in there. And, you know, you can interact with your friends in there, which is what she's doing initially. But eventually Belle's like, I don't know how long it had been by the time I left since she had even had contact with another human being. I would come in and leave her dinner tray, and then she would, you know, I would leave and I wouldn't even see her. And as far as I know, nobody saw her. Occasionally my brother, who was the only one that she was ever willing to see, he would see her. But even towards the end, I don't know if he did. So she has a pretty bleak history. And it becomes clear as they're traveling to Olamina that she doesn't have a plan other than going back to her family who has moved to Alaska. And even that she is aware is unlikely. Belle feels like she hasn't really got anywhere else to go, but she doesn't know that her parents would even take her back if she got the chance. So that's fucking horrifying. And it becomes really clear to Olamina that Belle doesn't have a purpose, and that's something that she really needs. So she begins to talk to her about Earthseed. And she begins to sort of, what's the word? She begins to seduce is the word that's often used, Belle to that Earthseed could be something to work on and toward and give her some purpose. It takes a little while, but eventually, through their travels, Olamina is able to connect with a number of other people. And this is something that we get hints of because we jump back into Asha's POV. And Asha is talking about Earthseed gaining a lot of popularity. It is something that people know about now. All the way across the country, they're hearing about this movement and these people funding it and the fact that it is an organization with a lot of money behind it. So we know preemptively that Olamina succeeds in what she was trying to do. And it's interesting to see her managing to connect with people again and talk to them and give them something, because that seems to be the real issue, is that in the aftermath of this horrific war, when people have lost everything, when the family that they had built their lives around has been taken from them or has been murdered, they don't know what to do with themselves anymore. And thus, they don't have a direction in life. And Olamina sees that and provides a direction using Earthseed, and people cling to that. That is the classic thing with just trying to get religion on the ground in the first place. You give people something to believe and cling to. And oftentimes that's all they need. They need something to hold on to that makes their life feel like it has some meaning. The difference is the meaning that it has is much more material with Earthseed, because it is not about some fantasy afterlife. It is about what you can do to make things better for people right now after you're gone, which I think is a much healthier way of approaching it. We're not talking about selfish desires to do good in order to get a good grade and then get sent to good recess. We're talking about doing good because you want to leave that legacy behind you, and you want other people to be able to continue to do good as well. And it begins to really ring true for a lot of people. And because Olamina has skills that are marketable towards those who have money, she has all kinds of carpentry skills, landscaping and gardening, and the people who hire her for day labor are wealthy. She manages to insinuate herself into the households of some people who have plenty of money and nothing to do, and other rich friends, which is key. This is exactly how you want things to work if you are trying to get something off the ground. You can't ask for a better setup than this. And it sort of snowballs. It's when people say snowball, a lot of times what they mean is that got it started and then it goes from there. When I say snowball, I mean it in the way that when you watch something roll downhill and turn into a snowball, it grows exponentially. All you need is that little seed, and it sort of will take off on its own, and each person talks to 7 other people. And eventually you have this practically the actual realized result of a pyramid scheme, except, it's not a scheme. There's no profit to be made here. So yeah, we know that this winds up working out for her. And it's really interesting how the story is told, that we find out that it worked out for her before we actually see the conversations that she has with these people from her own POV, because I feel like if we saw the conversations first, I might have been a little impatient about it. But because we're set up to know that this time it actually takes hold, it makes it much more interesting to watch her work and to see her do this. And that's part of the difference between believing in something and doing something because you believe in it, and just trying something out and hoping it works and then giving up right away. If, like me watching from the outside, if I would get impatient because she was just doing again what she had tried to do once before, I obviously don't really believe in this. This is not something that means very much to me. I'm not even necessarily like hopeful either way about her belief system. I'm rooting for Olamina in a way, but it's not hugely important to me whether Earthseed succeeds. For me, I'm much more concerned about her finding her daughter. But for Olamina, she believes what she believes and is so convinced of her purpose that trying again is just like, it's doing anything else is out of the question. Of course she's trying again. How she feels almost as if she doesn't even have a choice in the matter. Like this is just what she was put here for. And to do otherwise would be absurd. So let's jump back to the beginning of chapter 20. We find out that Asha had left home mostly because of fucking Madison groping her all the time and her wanting to get the hell out of here. And she is told by her adoptive parents that if she leaves without getting married, that she is not welcome home again. There is this assumption that if she leaves home, she's going to become a prostitute or, you know, become a thief or a heathen or whatever immediately. And it's really, really hurtful to her that when she leaves, she tries to continue going to church because that is her community. And nobody wants her there. It is just really shocking to her the way that they turn on her, and so immediately. The rumors began at once. I was having sex with any number of men. I was pregnant. I had had an abortion. I had cursed God and my real mother in a heathen cult. I was spreading lies about Madison. People I had grown up with, people I had thought of as friends, stopped speaking to me. Men who had paid no attention to me while I was at home now began to edge up to me with whispered invitations and unwanted little touches, and then angry denunciations when I wouldn't give them what they now seemed to think they had a right to get from me. Oh, if that isn't the realest shit. I couldn't take it. A few months after I left home, I left the church. Y'all, if I could tell you every story about people who have been treated like this, and everybody acts like it's like them leaving the church means that they have left God behind. And it's like, no, they left your toxic asses behind because you didn't have their back, defend them, or seem to even care about them as a human being. These stories are a dime a dozen. And she is really shocked at the fact that after she leaves the church, she genuinely misses it. And she even misses her shitty adopted parents. Like, this was her community. This was what she grew up in. It was what she knew. And having it taken away as an option was just not something that she had expected. And she had really just kind of thought that this net of community would always be there for her, even if her family wasn't. And to find out that wasn't true, I mean, yeah, that's heartbreaking. So she finally goes and she's like, excuse me. She finds out that this reverend that she has heard of before, she's heard him speak, I think on the radio or something, and he is also really attractive, is going to be coming to preach. So she decides to go and see him. And she's hanging around outside and she is singing, and somebody comes up to her and she thinks that they're upset because she's disturbing them with her singing. And it turns out that he has a message from Marcos. Marcos is aware of who she is. And he tells her that they're dead. And when he did this, I was like, for a second, I was like, well, this is far enough in the future that maybe by now she is dead. But then when he tells her that her parents both died at Acorn, I was like, oh, he is not. Are you kidding me? Oh my God. I'd like you guys. Oh my God. So she describes this meeting and him telling her and feeling this like desire to be with Marcos, like that she thinks now that she was like kind of in love with him a little bit, although she's pretty sure that he was attracted to men and he just like didn't have any sexual relationships at all because according to what he believed, homosexuality was a sin. So he just chose to abstain from a romantic relationship entirely, which, yeah, that's something that's familiar to me also. And she grows so attached to him, and he pays for her education. He pays for a place for her to live. He takes care of her and takes pride in her and loves her in a way that she has not been loved before. And so she grows more and more loyal to him. So eventually she finds out by herself who her mother actually is. And chapter 21 starts with, I don't know that Uncle Mark would ever have told me the truth about my mother. I don't believe he intended to. He never wavered from his story that she was dead, and I never suspected he was lying. I loved him, believed in him, trusted him completely. When he found out how I was living, he invited me to live with him and continue my education. I said yes. I didn't even have to think about it. I quit my job, went to live in one of his houses in New York. He hired a housekeeper and tutors and bought computer courses to see to it that I had the college education that Casey and Madison wouldn't have provided for me even if they could have. Casey used to say, "You're a girl. If you know how to keep a clean, decent house and how to worship God, you know enough." And she talks about having lost faith in the church. And the fact that everybody had turned their backs on her really, to her, was an indicator that this love that they claimed to preach was not real. That most people were hypocrites about it. She accepts that her uncle meant what he said, but it wasn't really enough to bring her back into believing this whole thing. The idea of like heaven and hell just seemed sort of ridiculous to her. So she starts working on, she gets her master's degree. Eventually she gets her PhD and she's working on the dream masks and stuff and really begins to make a name for herself with that. And then she stumbles across this article about Earthseed. And she's reading it to Mark, and she expects him to like kind of laugh at it and treat it as a joke, but he gets really touchy in a way that she hadn't expected. And she says, the more I read about Earthseed, the more I despised it. So much needed to be done here on Earth. So many diseases, so much hunger, so much poverty, such suffering. And here was a rich organization spending vast sums of money, time, and effort on nonsense. Just nonsense. Then I found the books of the living, and I accessed images and information concerning Lauren Oya Olamina. And she realizes that Lauren looks a lot like her, and then she reads about how she came from a place called Acorn. And she also says that she had a very strong reaction to Lauren's photo. She looked somehow like someone I would be inclined to like and trust, which scared me. It made me immediately dislike and distrust her. She was a cult leader, after all. She was supposed to be seductive, but she wasn't going to seduce me. Oh, guys, this is so painful. And the thing is, like, regarding the going up to space, I don't disagree with her on that point at all. Like, for me, I always find the idea of deciding to move from Earth onto other planets in order to inhabit them to be a deeply irresponsible act. We have so much to do here, and we have so much technology that spreading the disease of our existence onto other planets just is the height of arrogance and folly. Like, it's unthinkable to me. So in that, I understand where she's coming from. But that's a difference. That's a whole other thing to talk about. You know, it's not like she tries to give that a chance or hear out Olamina or anything. And I'll be honest, I don't feel like I truly understand why Olamina with her God is change. That I understand, and I even somewhat agree with and believe. But it's the take root among the stars thing that I don't get. And I don't really understand where her certainty on that front even comes from. So I, in some ways, totally get where Asha's coming from here. But it is really hard to know that she like has the chance to talk to the person who believes all of this stuff, who cares about her, and would love nothing more than to have this conversation. And she doesn't do it. And this was her immediate reaction. And it doesn't feel like her opinion changed very much in the end. So we go back into a POV, or I guess a journal entry from Olamina. And she talks about running into Marc again. And how it took a couple of tries to even like get him to see her. And she says, I wish you could spare a little concern for your niece. And he says, I told you what you should do to find her. This is really interesting to me because I wonder if she did decide to join Christians of America, if he would have told her or not. Like part of me still thinks that he wouldn't. And she says, I can't. If Cougar were here, could you enlist with him again just as a job? Could you become one of his helpers? And he says, it's not the same. She says, it is the same. What Cougar did to you, they did to me. The only difference is they did it to me longer. And don't tell me the Crusaders are just renegades. They're not. They're as much a part of the CA as the shelters are. I spotted one of the men who raped and lashed us at Acorn. He was working as an armed guard at the Eureka shelter. Marc stood up. He all but pushed his chair over in his eagerness to get away from me. I finally got a chance to have what I want, he said. You're not going to wreck it for me. This isn't about you, I said, still seated. I wish you had a child, Marc. If you did, you might be able to understand what it's like to not know where she is, whether she's being well treated, or even whether she's still alive. And it says he stood over me for a long time, looking down at me as though he hated me. I don't believe you feel anything. I think you're supposed to care, so you pretend to. Maybe you even want to, but you don't. Oh, y'all. When I tell you I wanted to reach through the pages of this book and rip his ever-loving heart out of his fucking chest, the audacity, the fucking audacity. Oh, I hate him so much. It's all about him. I have a chance at what I want. You're not going to wreck it for me. And to hell with the truth. To hell with what she actually went through. And the fact that you also went through it. But apparently only what you went through matters. And what she experienced means nothing. I hate him so much. I hate him so, so much. And she, when she's talking later to Len about this, she says he needs to make everything my fault. He can't let himself admit what Christian America did to me. He couldn't stay with them if they did such things, so he's decided that they're innocent and somehow everything is my fault. And Len is like, you're making excuses, but she's like, no, I'm not. I really think that's what he's actually feeling. Which, I mean, that's probably part of it. But for me, it doesn't totally explain how he was talking about her before even she came to him and told him about what happened at Acorn. He was making sermons about how she had wronged him and everything. You know, like there was already some sort of resentment simmering with him that I think had more to do with her having saved his life than it did with even his attachment to Christian America yet. He's just a fucking egomaniac. That's all it is, you know? So this is the, like, I think last time that she ever sees him. And we get some details on how she is inviting all of the people that had been part of Acorn North, because the folks who have joined up with her cause are offering places to stay and jobs and, you know, community support. So she is able to get a lot of them places that are safe and comfortable, which is amazing. And let's see, here it is. Okay. I never saw Casey and Madison again. I sent them money when they were older and in need, and I hired people to look after them, but I never went back to them. They did their duty toward me, and I did mine toward them. My mother, when I finally met her, was still a drifter. So eventually, Olamina's out here like getting paid to go on speaking gigs and just generally like really making it. Things are happening for her. And it takes a little while before Asha is able to get in to speak to her because everybody is kind of protective of her and her privacy. We find out that eventually Christian America like hits her with a lawsuit because she says that they like stole her child, and she countersues, I think. And all of a sudden they drop everything and pay up a settlement. So she has to have something as evidence. I'm super curious about it. I would love to have known the details about all of that. And she evidently during that time pressed them for information about her daughter, and they wouldn't give it to her. They told her that like all the files had been destroyed. Again, another piece of evidence that she never stopped looking for her daughter. But like at this point, Asha doesn't like, she can't believe it. There's just things that once you have wrapped your identity around a certain story, you can't let yourself believe anything but that story, or else everything falls apart. So they meet, and there is this immediate sort of like reaction that Asha has where she wants to get away from her because she feels so drawn to her that it like kind of freaks her out. There's an openness and welcome to her that she like sees as threatening. It's weird. She says, then I found Uncle Mark, and finally, when? She demanded, and her tone was as cold as her expression. When did you find Mark? When did you learn that he was your uncle? How did you find out? Tell me. And irrationally, I didn't want to. I wanted to get away from her. She was one of those people who sucked you in, made you like her before you could even get to know her, and only then let you see what she might really be like. She had millions of people convinced that they were going to fly off to the stars. How much money had she taken from them while they waited for the ship to Alpha Centauri? My God, I didn't want to like her. I wanted the ugly persona I had glimpsed to be what she really was. I wanted to despise her. Instead, I told her the story of my life. And she gets the story and is startled at how moved she is by it and cries in response to like hearing all of this. And she finally asks, what did Mark tell you? And she's like, yeah, well, he told me that you guys were dead. And she tries to be understanding about him telling her that they were dead. But eventually she lets slip that Mark had found her when she was a baby. He said he found me when I was 2 or 3 years old, but he saw that I had good Christian American parents, and he thought it would be best for me to stay with them undisturbed. I'm not sure why I said that. She got up and began to walk again. I never thought he would do that to me, she said. I never thought he hated me enough to do a thing like that. I never thought he could hate anyone that much. I saved him from slavery. I saved his worthless life, goddammit. He doesn't hate you, I said. I'm sure he doesn't. I've never known him to hate anyone. He thought he was doing right. Don't defend him, she whispered. I know you love him, but don't defend him to me. I loved him myself, and see what he's done to me, and to you. You're a cult leader, I said. He's Christian American. He believed, I don't care. I've spoken with him hundreds of times since he found you, and he said nothing. I was like a daughter to him. He was like a father to me. She stopped her pacing and stood staring down at me with an almost frightening intensity. She stared at me as though she hated me. I stood up, looked around for my jacket, found it, and put it on. No, she said, don't go. Please don't go. Not yet. But I needed to go. She is an overwhelming person, and I needed to get away from her. "All right," she said when I headed for the door, "but you can always come to me. Come back tomorrow. Come back whenever you want to. We just have so much time to make up for. My door is open to you, Larkin, always." I stopped and looked back at her, realizing that she had called me by the name she had given to her baby daughter so long ago. "Asha," I said, looking back at her. "My name is Asha Vare." She looked confused, then her face seemed to sag the way Uncle Mark's had when I phoned him to ask about her. She looked so hurt and sad that I couldn't stop myself from feeling sorry for her. "Asha," she whispered. "My door is open to you, Asha. Always." And eventually, Mark tries to get in touch with her, and she refuses to speak to him. And essentially, out of anger at the fact that he is hurting Mark, it seems that Asha does not want to see her again. "I loved him more than I'd ever loved anyone, no matter what he had done, and she was hurting him. I didn't know whether I would ever see her again, or whether I should, or whether I wanted to." And then we jump ahead, and we get to see that Olamina has succeeded in like funding space shuttles, and she is seeing off one of the first groups, and it is honestly bonkers that she manages this. But, what did it cost her? And she manages to see that she succeeded in this and be thankful for it and excited about it and understand that this is what she wanted. But it finishes with, "My Larkin would not come. I begged her, but she refused. She's caring for Mark. He's just getting over another heart transplant. How completely, how thoroughly he has stolen my child. I have never even tried to forgive him." And then we get the detail that she knows she's going to die soon. She's 81, and she winds up dying very shortly after this. And that she wants to be cremated, and her ashes mixed with the soil that they use on another planet when they decide to plant there, so that she can be literally among the stars, out there as part of what she created. And it all wraps with the verse about the parable of the talents from the Bible, which ends, those of you who don't know, it's the parable about how a group of different men are given money, and each of them has to come back in, a few months and bring the money back. And some of them are able to bring back more because they invested it and they did things with it. And one of them just buries it, and he gets no, there's no earning happening from it. He just preserves it and brings back exactly what he was given. And he winds up being yelled at for squandering what he had and not doing anything productive with it. But the last two paragraphs are really fucked up. Now, first of all, the servant says, "Lord, I knew thee that thou art an hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. And I was afraid, and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there thou hast what is thine." His Lord answered and said unto him, "Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gather where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received mine own with usury. Take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him which hath 10 talents. For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath." Which, honestly, what the fuck? I don't think I ever read that, verse about how basically if you have not, we're just going to rake you over the coals and take everything from you. But that is a messed up verse. And it feels really appropriate for this book after all, because I had been thinking to myself, what exactly is the parable of the talents in regard to this story? And now I'm kind of oh, there it is. Just And also that Olamina managed to somehow multiply her talents. But it's like, again, at what cost? God, y'all, this is brutal. So I don't know, like nobody has been coming to the crowdcast. I'm not sure who's listening, but if anybody has thoughts that they want to share on this, let me know what you think. Danique, definitely, of course. And I'm going to be looking into a little bit more about Octavia Butler's life, just out of curiosity to see if there's any parallels there. And yeah, this book ripped my heart out. So Danique, I think I hate you still, but thank you. But also I hate you. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.